The hosts feel it would be a little unkind to present this podcast without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold the story of Frankenstein, a man of science who sought to create a man after his own image without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest tales ever told. It deals with the two great mysteries of creation, life and death. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now's your chance to. Well, we've warned you. Hello, and welcome once again to the Frankencast. I'm the mad scientist, Anthony Bowman. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm joined as always by...
the flying psychic doll that is Eric Velasquez. My pronouns are he, him. And we're joined today by...
the blood-soaked chicken standing on the desk of the recently deceased head of a major university that is Alex Heichelbech. He, him as well.
Brilliant. Amazing.
Yeah, So we mentioned last week, our friend Alex here introduced us to this movie, The Last Frankenstein. So of course we were gonna have to have him on here to talk about it. I think Alex was the first name dropped person that we talked about on the show because Alex helped us out with some Japanese stuff back when we were talking about the Toho movies. Mm-hmm. But this is definitely not a Toho movie.
This is not a Toho movie. This is a Bandai movie.
Yeah, it is Bandai. I love sharing things with people.
Yeah.
Food, stories, whatever. I've never been more excited to share a thing with anyone else because everyone I've ever tried to get to watch this movie I've lost social credit with them. Right. Finally, someone that I can earn back all of the lost karma for trying to get other people to watch this movie that I love so much.
Well, you've earned it in spades, my friend. You've earned it in spades.
Good to hear.
Yeah, a couple of days ago you were talking to us and you were like, I know you all have watched a lot of crazy what the fuck type movies, mm-hmm. and I'm curious to see how this holds up. And this has what the fuck moments in spades for sure.
Yeah. I think during the 90s, a lot of Japanese, I don't know if necessarily genre stuff, just was like, what the fuck? Because there was a Devilman movie in, I think maybe 98, and that was fucking wild. Have you seen that, Alex?
I don't think I have. No. I'll have
to you should check it out. And then also Ichi the Killer.
Yeah, of course, that's Ichi the Killer.
Yeah,
getting Japanese people on board with gore during the 90s was a big thing because traditional Japanese theater is heavy on violence, but very stylized. Someone gets stabbed and they pull a red ribbon out of their costume. So the idea of violence is pretty ingrained, but gore becoming a thing that was started in the 80s, and then the 90s is where they really went buck on going for it. So.
Yeah, I remember those late 80s anime. There's what is it? Yeah. Well, Akira being one of them, but that's kind of lazy. But what is it? Something cat. Lily Cat.
I was going to go Samurai Pizza Cat, but I watched a very different version of Samurai Pizza Cat.
That's amazing. All right. So this is very late 80s, early 90s. We get the intro with the not prog rock intro, but everything is metallic and has the gradient on in the beginning intro.
Yeah, we get this quote, and at first I was like, I don't know this
Who the hell
philosopher. I'll have to ask Alex about it.
Did you all try to Google him? I really
did.
Yes, I was so hoping that someone would Google him. I love when a movie quotes one of its own characters.
Right?
Yeah, the first time I watched the movie, because it's written in katakana at the bottom of the screen, which katakana in the Japanese alphabet is what you use for a foreign name. But then when it was translated, they translated it to sound a lot like a Japanese name, Akira Aleo. And I did the same thing. I looked everywhere for Japanese poets, philosophers,
right.
and couldn't find it. And then when I got part of the way through the movie, I was like, man, that's oh boy, I've been...
Right. Yeah. We'll talk about that quote. People of today will live longer than any other generation before, but they will find more to be unhappy about. That's big boomer energy right there.
And with Sonata number 14, the Moonlight Sonata right under it, so we're already setting a very somber tone.
Oh yeah. By the way, this movie loves the Moonlight Sonata. Just loves it.
Yeah, I mean, I assume you pay for the song once, so you're going to get some mileage out of it.
Exactly. Yeah, so we start off with some beautiful waves crashing along the beach.
Yeah, it's like a gray, empty beach, and then like a kind of gray, empty forest, and then like a house in the woods. We're kind of like zooming in almost. And then we get like inside, there's like a clock striking. And we just
can I
see
ask
like
a question about the clock? What the fuck is up with that clock? Because
it had some normal letters and some were like X to the power of.
Right.
So like 6 o'clock said X to the power of 6, 7 was X to the power of 7. I have no
9,
idea.
11. And I'm like, okay, interesting. And in the middle, it's like X to the square root of X. And I'm like, why? What does this mean? Okay.
This is the closest we got to like spinny gears and whatnot. This was the science.
This is the science, yeah. Fair enough. All right, but yeah, we get a woman sleeping peacefully as the bells chime on the clock.
Yeah, and then we get like a narrator sort of like talking over and starting to tell the story. And, you know, it's kind of that like, I'm going to tell you my story. It's terrible, but it's true. And, you know, kind of that whole setup. And then we see him, he's sitting at like,
a word processor.
Old school word processor, which if you're not like a million years old is just like a giant thick ass laptop that's like,
It was a typewriter with an LCD.
Yeah, I was about to say, let's not lie. It was just a typewriter without the ribbon. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're this whole story. We're getting the recount from Professor Sarasawa, our kind of main character. This is his retelling of what happened, I guess.
Yeah. And then we get that pic. We got him talking about the religion of death that's kind of coming up, or that's been around. And we also get the baby fetus.
Baby fetus is kind of a double.
Well, yeah, okay. It's the fetus in the jar. Let's go back to that.
Yeah, you see it for a second, and then it cuts to a title card, and you're like, "What was that?" And then like, that actually does end up having payoff. That is not just like a completely random shot.
I mean, it bookends the entire movie. So
yeah, it really does.
Pretty accurately, yeah.
So our first title card, and these are, instead of like numbered, they're lettered. So we get A, God of Death.
Yeah.
And so then we're introduced, we see this like kind of very traditional style, like Japanese parade. They're like carrying banners and everything. And they're just chanting death, death, death.
But not in like an aggressive way. Like it's very rhythmic, and it's like this, just like Shio, dun 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 Shio. Like it's kind of calming almost. For me, at least.
As much as, just chanting about death can be, I guess.
And they've got their, like, banners. Like, I fully believe that they got a permit from the city for what they were doing there. It felt very above board for a death cult.
Right? They actually petitioned the courts and everything. And got
I assume finances are relatively tight in a death cult, so you can't afford a lot of fines.
Well, you never know. They might be going all out there.
That's true. Like they blew all of their budget on white clothes and flags and face paint. Yeah, the face paint is important as well.
Yeah. So this death cult is very Junji Ito. I could see him gaining inspiration from these guys because, like, the cult leader, he reminds me of one of the characters from which book is it? He uses nails on everything.
I'm not as familiar with Junji Ito's stuff. I know quite a bit of it, but that is the most disturbing stuff in the world.
Right?
I have a very low tolerance for Junji Ito's stuff. It ruins me.
Okay, Soichi is the character's name.
Soichi, okay. I'll have to look that up.
So look him up.
But yeah, the leader, and they call it Shinyo-kyo, is the way they translate it. They don't actually say that. Like, none of the characters actually say Shinyo-kyo. Right. But Shinyo-kyo just means religion or faith of death.
Okay.
So they're using that as kind of a filler for just death cult, because they just call themselves death cult. They don't have a radical name.
You're all, well,
it felt like,
do with what you got.
Are they, like, it kind of felt like they were nodding to, like, Aum Shinrikyo a little bit.
Okay, I don't know at what point you want me to get into this, but I am ready to do it. This movie came out well before Aum Shinrikyo was a big established thing. So the main reason I nerd out about this, I guess I'm just going to get into it now.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Takeshi Kawamura, the director for this, is incredible. And this is really the only movie that he did. He's a playwright and direct, like who's big in theater. And he is incredibly inspired by like pop culture and things that are highly violent and like physical plays, like highly violent plays. And he started doing those in the 80s. And he was big on criticizing like Japanese social conditions, current events, and specifically, and this will become really important as we go on, the dangerous role that like media and the news played in people confusing fantasy and reality. And that after the media was introduced and as Japan started becoming more westernized, human individuality just evaporated. There was no I, it was just we, and you had to be a part of the collective. So he started or was inspired by what was called Japanese Angura theater from the 60s and 70s, which was like the first experimental avant-garde, not literal theater that had come to Japan, because Japanese classical theater was always very literal. So then this Angura theater in the 60s and 70s was very avant-garde, and then Takeshi Kawamura was obsessed with like Blade Runner and The Wild Bunch and Straw Dogs. And so he pulled a lot of that into his work, but he was also big on like social commentary and activism. So Aum Shinrikyo started in 1987. And it was originally a yoga and meditation class that then became an apocalyptic death cult. But in like 91, when this movie came out, it was like, hadn't even made the newspapers. Like it could not have been farther in the back of people's minds. But he saw that like this death cult was a thing. It's like, does no one else think this is weird? Like, is it just me? And everyone was like, oh, you know, just boys will be boys. Like, let them have their little death cult. And he was like, you know, like a death cult is a bad sign for society as a whole. So he put them in the movie as a way to warn people that this was an issue. And then in, 1995, they released it with sarin gas. And he was like, I tried. So
I did everything I could.
That's incredible.
The main thing that got me obsessed with this guy is him trying to point out, like, this is going to be an issue. And nobody believed it. I mean, the entire point of this, like that cult, to kind of jump back into where we were, they're having a ritual, like actually, oddly enough, the area where they're having the ritual, Anthony, is the courtyard where we met up with that Japanese metal band, the one with the train in it.
Oh, okay.
We've stood there. We stood in that courtyard.
That's awesome.
But unlike a lot of the death cults that are like very like fire and brimstone, it's like a joyous thing, because he's going like, life is useless. You need to embrace death. And the absolute worst thing that's happening right now, this is the cult leader, not me.
Right.
The worst thing that's happening right now is like society is keeping you from obtaining this ultimate pleasure that is death. Like that's what you should want it. You need it. You're being lied to and told that you shouldn't die. And that's, the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah, and of course the reporter's there smiling the entire time she's reporting about the death cult.
Yeah, you have to.
You got it,
And she like goes around and does like man on the street interviews, and they're so funny.
Yeah, and those were not scripted. I think one or two might have been, but the people she was talking to on the street, those were not people that knew they were part of a movie.
Yeah,
she was because she wasn't doing it like, what do you think of this new, like she wasn't referencing any specific name. She was like, what do you think of suicide? What do you think of the rise in suicides? Because suicide was on the rise in the late 80s, early 90s. Because she goes up to one of the people and was like, what do you think of suicide? And she said, I don't want to be on TV.
Right.
People in movies don't talk that way.
Right.
Well, I really like the woman with her kid who's like, it seems popular, but I don't want to try it.
Right, yeah.
Like it was a new music or something.
Yeah.
And of course, the businessman is like, I just want to fucking go to work.
Yeah. Leave me alone. I don't have time. So I think some of them might have been, like the businessman one seemed a little bit scripted, but I think a lot of those were very, which again is kind of his nod to that avant-garde. Like what's more avant-garde than a play or a movie that has people in it that don't know they're in a movie. Kind of.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then to extend that avant-garde thing, like we cut away and we see just an umbrella slowly falling from a building in the rain.
Right, and I'm like, did someone just jump? Is that what we're alluding to? Well, surprise.
Yeah. We see, there's a man on the sidewalk bleeding out, presumably from jumping from the building. And then to like echo that umbrella falling, we slowly see like a crowd surround him, and they're all holding umbrellas because it's raining, but they're all just kind of watching this person bleed out and discussing like the beauty of death and how peaceful he looks and everything.
Yeah, he's strong and independent.
Yeah, so I thought it was really cool because for the viewer, it's, everything that the cult leader was saying is very like, okay, that's some crackpot. Like, okay, yeah, death's the ultimate surrender. I gotta get to work and work my 9-to-5 job so I can afford a mortgage. Mm-hmm. And then you see like people in the show that like, oh, this is actually resonating with a not insignificant portion of society, which I think kind of leads into later. They conceptualize this like, oh, it's a disease, like it's an actual virus or bacterium or something. And I think it was just because they didn't want to admit that like this is a thing that people are kind of into conceptually. Right. The idea that like, hey, maybe it's better to just not be here.
Yeah, understandable, I guess. we don't get to dwell on that too long because we then cut back to the priest, and he's praising that death is beautiful. It is a selfish act, but it's ultimately a satisfying one.
Prove me wrong.
Right. Well, exactly.
Yeah, 100% of people that have gone through with it have not come back to complain. So they seem to be down for it. And then is this the one where it ends with them like bowing to the city while you hear a plane go overhead? Is that how scene A ends?
I think that's a little bit later.
Okay, I don't remember exactly. It ends with him speaking to his kind of congregation, and they turn towards the city and bow, and you hear like a really loud like plane going over. Right. I thought there was about to be like a plane strike. They didn't do that.
I thought so too.
But I might be conflated, but I know that happens early on. I don't know exactly when. I thought it was at the end of part A.
Yeah, it may have been. Because after that speech, we cut to part B, human body.
Oh, God. If you didn't think it was weird enough already, here we go.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're in like an anatomy class. The professor is discussing like the mysteries of the human body. He has a cadaver on a table in front of him. This like nude woman,
as nude as you can be on Japanese.
Yeah, I mean,
they have the little privacy bandage. Just for clarification, this is Professor Sarasawa, the same gentleman that is our narrator at the start. So this is our main character.
And it's kind of strange because like at first he's like, the human body is very mysterious. And then he's like, but we've pretty much figured it all out at this point. I think we've got it all kind of under control. And then this girl stands up and is like, I still think there's lots of mystery in the human body. There are fads and things change. And he's kind of like dismissive of her suggestions.
Well, he's dismissive, and then it turns slightly more sinister. Yeah. He's like, yeah, you could explore human bodies. Not that I would want to have sex with you, he says to his student.
He says maybe you need to start focusing on the lower body instead of your intellectual pursuit.
Yeah, which is absolutely a thing that will. He must be tenured as hell to be able to pop that one off and still be fun. So yeah, he sexually harasses that student, and then he has so much built up tension that leads us into the next scene where it's just him spending some quality time with this corpse. And maybe, if there's a naked corpse in front of you, why don't you
give it a pat?
Yeah, give it a pat. And the location you patted is irrelevant. Just so happened to be on a spot that, is slightly inappropriate to touch. Yeah. So he's working through some stuff by sexually harassing his students and then sexually harassing a corpse.
Well, I mean, he's obviously doing something because he's smoking the cigarette right over it as well.
Yeah, we didn't see what happened pre-cigarette.
And not only does he harass that student, but like the class laughs. Like nobody like defends her or anything.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of overarching themes, and again, when I went on my little rant about Takeshi Kawamura, he doesn't have a super positive viewpoint of society as a whole, obviously. Like, a lot of his stuff is really focused on kind of the depravity and the bad parts of society. There are no good ancillary, like, all of your background characters are terrible people. Yeah. Like, there are you never see anyone outside of our main cast we'll get to later, like, being helpful or positive or kind. Like, everyone is a cruel, horrible person. And that kind of ties into his like, hey, humanity sucks. Maybe these suicide cults have a point if things keep going the way they're going.
Yeah, to be fair, even the people that are supposed to be helpful definitely just are there to be either pains in the main character's ass or they're just kind of a roadblock. You're right about that. 100%. But we don't get to think about that too long because after the grope, we hear some glass breaking. And of course, Sarazawa has to go investigate it, right? That's the role of horror movies.
But like nothing really comes of this.
Yeah, there's nothing there. I was waiting for a payoff, but he goes out to investigate, and I don't know if this was one of the characters we'd meet later, or if this was just a way to show that he was like ashamed of what he was doing. Like he was worried someone was going to see him or they don't really address it. And I think that happens a couple times in the movie. I think there's a couple parts where the director introduced something intending for it to have a payoff. And then either it got cutting room floored or it just didn't become relevant again. Because there's a couple times where a thing happens that's like, oh, surely they'll answer that question. And they for sure do not. I have a substantial list, and then it smash cuts to him back in his, I don't know if he was in his home or his office. I'm not sure.
He was reading a pamphlet or a newspaper. Did you catch what that said?
Yes. So he reads two things back to back in case you really needed the point driven home. The first thing he has is an invitation from the university the university system that he's a part of, that is introducing an academic conference for what they call the new plague, which is what the academic name is for this rash of suicides. They've determined it's a plague. So that's the kind of actual like yellow piece of paper that's inviting him to this conference for the new plague. Then he picks up a newspaper that has a headline just talking about a astronomical rise in suicides.
Right.
Okay. So it's again relating. If someone was like, well, what's the new plague? They're like, oh, right. It's these suicides. The only other thing we've talked about in the movie so far. But he doesn't get a chance to read much of the newspaper, does he?
No, because apparently he hallucinates the girl from earlier, or at least somebody coming in. And what do you do to a hallucination? You grab it by the boobs. That's what you do.
I mean, yeah. So he's definitely, and if anyone on their bingo card had breast or leg man for Professor Surasawa, he's solidly an upper body kind of guy.
And of course, this isn't a hallucination. This is a real person. So she slaps the shit out of him, which I condone.
And then you all know how you kiss your significant other.
Man. Rub your tongue against their tongue.
This is on par with that dude eating that tomato in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, this is very uncomfortable.
So she like sticks her tongue out of her mouth like maybe an eighth of an inch, and then he's like, huh, and then he sticks his tongue out an eighth of an inch, and they just kind of like Eskimo kiss, like boop, their tongues together, and then it smash cuts to them nude under a blanket in bed. Like we don't see any thrusts. It's just we just see post-coital. So Japanese, it starts a little bit different, I guess.
It's all good. And of course, right after sex, you got to ask, hey, why were you making fun of me? Why were you being so mean during class? Come on.
And then you just go ahead and bare your soul and it's like, oh, my wife killed herself 5 years ago. So,
right.
Oh, man.
This isn't hitting it with any hard...
just that right after intercourse, you want to talk about your dead wife. And then it does what I think a lot of Japanese horror movies do, that kind of fast zoom in on, his wife, her corpse, I guess, where she had killed herself in their home 5 years prior.
And like when they talk, like it seems to, like, because they're talking about like maybe going away, but he can't really because like he still has his daughter and everything. So like this is not like an initial encounter between them. Like they have a relationship. So that makes like him hitting on her publicly in a cruel way such a really strange thing to have happened.
Yeah, again, he's just like everyone else that exists in the world. He's also a bad person.
You're not wrong.
So yeah, it was just kind of that. And I don't know if it was, again, I feel like she was intended to have a little bit more screen time, that they would have elaborated on their relationship. If it was like, he had some, I just like to have power over somebody, but he didn't come across me as the egocentric power grab type. So I don't know what the purpose of her was other than a way to introduce his deceased wife.
Yeah. After their sort of conversation, we just cut to him driving home later, or presumably home.
Yeah,
I kind of love this, though.
But it's like whoever's filming is like in the passenger seat and is holding the camera about 3 inches away from his face. It looks like one of those like they're about to pull up and like do a prank at a drive-thru or whatever. Like someone's filming it on a cell phone. It's a really poorly put together shot.
I know, but I still love the fact that first you have just someone running across the street to get Sarazawa to stop. And then once he does, he just gets swarmed by the cults.
Yeah, they just come out of it's like middle of the night. They just come out of the bushes and swarm the car. And this is another thing that I think is probably due to, I don't know if it's just budget, and also that this is a individual that primarily dealt in stage, theater, not films. Transitions are a little rough. It's a lot of like audio and video just cuts off and it was like scene over, next scene begin. Kind of just really abrupt transitions, which I guess is a really hard thing to get good and nuanced at.
Yeah, I definitely hope you have a neck brace because this is lead to some whiplash.
Yeah, there's a couple of some quick turns. But yeah, he gets mobbed by the cultists, and I think that's the end of part B, isn't it?
Yep. So then we go on to part C, Mai.
So Mai, the kanji they put up on the screen for Mai is the kanji for dance, which is totally irrelevant. I just wanted to show off that I recognize that.
Okay, just showing off.
A bit of a humble brag there in the middle. And then you know how when you want to, I don't know a lot about, horror movies, but this felt like jumping the shark to an astronaut who's like, oh man, I'm this overworked professor. There's this, this plague, there's this death cult. And now I've got to deal with this gall darn telekinetic daughter of mine. Like, right. So he just walks in the front door and there's just a doll floating. And you'd expect her to be like, oh, gasp. And he's just like, stop wasting your powers on stupid things. Right. Instead, use it to run me a bath and make dinner.
Right.
At first, I was just like, does he not actually have a daughter? Does he have a robot that he calls his daughter? And then, it pretty quickly.
I was thinking he already did the resurrection on this doll.
There's a doll floating in the middle of the room, and then you see he's like, stop wasting your powers, and then it turns on a stove. Yeah. It starts filling up a tub, and then it shows him sitting in a tub. Then when he gets out of the tub and back to the living room, there's a human girl sitting on there, and he's like, oh, hey, Mai, what's up? So I guess they didn't have her for filming on the first day, so they couldn't have her in the room while the doll was floating.
Either that or they were like, we also need to show that, she has telekinetic powers. Or they did what you said because they didn't have her on the first day.
They were still working on casting. Yeah. But it was just like this incredible, you've just dropped that this guy has a telekinetic daughter, like they were talking about him having a red wall in his house. Yeah. It was just the most bland introduction. And she's my favorite character. I think Mai is my favorite character from the whole movie by far.
She might be the only one who's actually maybe a good person. She seems like a good person.
100% she's the only good person. And that I think becomes relevant later. But then, and this is where I think that earlier scene that finished off part A, where the cult leader gave that big speech, and then they went outside and were all bowing towards the city. After we get introduced to Mai and they have kind of a quick back and forth, he's like, oh, I've got this conference, yada, yada, yada. She goes outside and just kind of spreads her arms and is looking off into the distance. And I heard that same kind of droning, almost like an engine sound. So it's not only is she telekinetic, but she's got wind of something going on.
It almost seems like the god of death is calling to her, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you do hear, there's a voice that says, I'm calling you at that point. And I think there's one or two other times where she just goes outside and looks at the sky, and it's never really explained what's going on.
And that's another part, which again, I don't know why, but her abilities get triggered by a lot of different things. A couple of times she goes outside. There's another bit later on where a bunch of students overdose on medicine in a park, and when that happens, it snap cuts back to her and she's in her classroom levitating 4 feet in the air, which is a great shot because all the students are looking at her, and one student in the background really slowly gets up from his desk. So he's like, but early on, anytime something involving mass death happens, it seems to trigger an event for her, I guess.
Right. Yeah, and of course, the next we cut to part D, dead body.
Dead body.
Yep, just dead bodies. And Tarazan comes in and he runs into a colleague. There's apparently been a body that's been stolen the night before. And this
a cadaver.
Is a cadaver, sorry. This is the fifth one since school started.
So someone, and I don't. You all know. I mean, you all have watched a couple of Frankenstein movies. Is there anyone that you know of that has need of dead bodies?
Maybe some doctors. Maybe.
I don't know. It feels like a bit of a trope that I'm sure has been explored before.
Well, not as much as a hunchback.
Yeah. So the next bit is the conference that he got. Yeah, God, that hunchback. The conference is the next scene, and that's the conference he got the invitation for. Right. This is peak Takeshi Kawamura, because this is satirizing politicians and scholars and sycophants. This is a bunch of people in a room that all think they're the main character in a story, and they know best, and everyone else just needs to shut up and listen to them. And again, it's just the worst people. And they threw in some kind of Western tropes, like the ashtrays on the table just billowing out smoke.
Oh, yeah.
You almost couldn't see the table. It was just this comical, if people could have had top hats and big cigars on, I think he would have done that. But he just wanted to make these like the grossest, most over the top people at the table, literally, to show to us.
He does a pretty good job of that.
And yeah, they all feel like, I mean, they're very over the top and like, you get the one guy who's got like mad scientist hair.
Right.
Just like,
he's like, why are we even talking about these suicides? What's the importance of this? It's not like we're losing a large chunk of the population.
Yeah, it's so that scene was another one that they pulled a lot from kind of traditional Japanese theater. So like the old versions of Japanese theater, there was like no theater and kyogen. No's the one that people are familiar with, where it's the really intentional movements. And no plays were generally very serious in tone. But when people went to see a no performance, it was the entire play was divided into 9 parts. There would be a no segment, and then there would be a very brief kyogen segment that was comedic slapstick. So it was like to keep the audience interested, because no is generally pretty dry, bland stuff.
That explains a lot, actually.
Yeah, so this movie does the same thing, and this is really the first solid like kyogen, because someone says, oh, well, if we need to know what's happening, let's ask Professor Sarusawa. And like one guy's literally like beating himself over the head with a manuscript. Right. And someone else is like full on like Gumby arm waving in the air. Like they're just overacting. And this is that Japanese kyogen thing, or the same thing you see in like Japanese stand-up comedy, where you have a straight man and your comedic character. These are just meant to lampoon all of the people that are quote unquote smart, right, in the world at the time.
There's definitely like a thing with like filmmakers sort of attacking like bureaucracy in Japan. Like my touchstones for Japanese movies are often like kaiju movies. And it seems like that's always a thing where there's just like bureaucrats who are like, I haven't seen a Godzilla. I don't think there's anything going on. Meanwhile, Tokyo's like burning and stuff. And it felt similar where like they only wanted to talk about this hypothetically. And there's the like Serizawa's like, I might be infected by this disease if it exists because my wife killed herself. And they're like, no, that's a bummer. We don't want to talk about a real suicide. Let's talk about this theory.
Right. Don't bring your personal stuff into this.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other doctors completely anecdotally just says, based on some research, we think there's an incubation period of 3 to 5 years. But like he's not holding a document. There's no paper. He's just like saying that. So this is again the people that are like they're dead set that like this is just a disease. And Surasawa's like, well, if that's the case, then I should be going any day now. And yeah, they're just like, that's a bummer. We don't want to talk about that. Yeah. But then we get introduced. Someone's like, well, I might know of someone doing a little bit of research that might be relevant.
Yeah, some guy named Professor Aleo.
That name sounds familiar.
It's that guy we all Googled for 45 minutes.
Yeah, right.
So this is the one that had our quote about people of today will live longer, but they'll find more to be unhappy about.
Right. And hey, Alex, what's his nickname?
Oh, it's like Frank.
Yeah,
Frank Stone, I think. Yeah. And they introduce him. They're like, "What about Professor Aleo?" And someone's like, "Oh, you mean that old crackpot Frankenstein?" Blah! And everyone, again, the dude goes back to bludgeoning himself in the head with his papers. And so I think they kind of just tell Surasawa, like, oh yeah, go check with him, just as a way to kind of get rid of Surasawa. Like they were like, hey man, no bummers, like get out of here. And they just kind of boot him out of the conference room. And
then we get one of the weirdest scenes in the movie, even though it's nothing. So it's Surasawa and he's talking to another professor colleague, and they're kind of having like a very traditional walk and talk scene like you would get in like the wrestling, except they're walking backwards. Mm-hmm. Not only so they're walking backwards, everybody else is walking normally. They're walking through the campus, and Surasawa like ends up tripping on something and falling down.
He like falls on the ground and looks like he's dead. And they don't ever, that never happens again. They don't reference again. I think this was again another like absurdist nod to like the Western walk and talk.
Right.
It's like, in a Western movie, these people will be walking forward. I'm just going to have them walk backwards through the courtyard as another way to be like, what's going on?
This is absurd, right?
It felt to me, I was like, this feels like Japanese David Lynch or something.
Yeah, it does get, and from here on out, it gets very Lynchian, I think. So maybe that was a turning point, because the absurdist knob gets cranked up quite a bit after that.
Well, I mean, we go into the guy's office, and he has just a bunch of chickens in his office.
Yeah, my namesake. And then he's like, all right, well, good luck going talking to Alea or Dr. Aleo. And then he walks out of the room. Surasawa walks out of the room, and Chekhov's gun even done.
We didn't even know we had the Chekhov gun.
The worst thing, you never even introduced a gun, which getting a gun in Japan, super easy, so that makes sense. He comes back in, and there's just this colleague of his slumped over the table, and there's some blood-covered chickens on the desk for reasons that we don't quite understand.
Yeah, and of course we get a note that says, "Goodbye, I'm sorry."
Yeah.
Which that will come back, weirdly enough.
Yeah. Sarasawa ends up with some like papers about Aleo, I think a book. His colleagues like, be careful, you don't know what you're getting into. And he's like, I'm already infected if it's something to be worried about. So I don't have anything else to lose. I might as well, see where this goes.
Right. It turns out we hear a little bit about Aleo, and he's very misanthropic, right? He thinks humans suck. Emotions are the worst. We need a new type of human. That's kind of what he's studying. We don't necessarily find out what that entails.
Yeah, the next phase of human evolution, sort of. And then, I don't remember, is Sarasawa's like walking home where he gets approached by Aleo's assistant?
It cuts back to his daughter, who's once again hearing voices on the roof. Then we cut to part E, goodbye and hello.
Yes.
Right, yeah, and that's where, he has a sort of vision. He sees his dead wife again, but she, like, looks up and says...
Her eyeballs are missing now. There's blood all around her.
Oh, yeah, and she says the goodbye, I'm sorry line.
In the guy's voice, the other guy's voice.
Yeah.
Right. And then... Yeah, and then we meet the hunchback assistant, who is the most hunchback
He's amazing. Assistant. Haruo is the best.
Like, this guy, his hunch is taller than his head. Like, it is above.
It's almost like they put a pyramid on his shoulder and told him to lean over, like a pyramid shape.
And he happens to be carrying a dead body, and then he growls at Sarasawa and then, like, runs away.
Gets into a VW Beetle and tears off.
A black VW Beetle. And, he tears off, goes down like a block, and then, like, his arm comes out the window and just flags him like, come on. And then Sarasawa approaches the car and opens the door, and it's full of dead bodies. And Haruho just looks over and says, Buenos dias. And his like, anytime he exits a scene, it's either with Buenos dias or Buenos noches.
Yeah. So he spits the gum in his face. That's amazing. I instantly loved Haruho once that happened. I'm like, this is the best character. You can't convince me otherwise. But then we get a little bit of a fight scene.
Yeah, he spits some gum at Sarasawa and then gets out of the car, and their fight scene is again like a very surrealist moment. Like we get like a boxing match bell that dings, and it almost
they both have the put up your dukes kind of stance, and there's like the like bang, like punch, like you not like a comic book thing, but like when he hits him, there's like an audible like cymbal crash.
No, this is almost Street Fighter sounds that I don't think Street Fighter had come out yet. The original. Oh, actually, Street Fighter 2 had just come out. So maybe there was
it felt like a video game to me, so I definitely would believe it.
And of course, Haruo is winning for the most part, starts biting into the doctor, but the doctor has one move that definitely evens up the match. He just gives him the old dick kick. Just kicks him right in the nards.
But he ultimately ends up kind of getting knocked out, and Haruo gets back in the car, speeds off with his bounty of corpses.
An embarrassment of corpses, if you will.
Yeah. And then part F is Psychic Link.
Oh, no. All right, so we get a bunch of school kids. They're hanging out, and then just one random kid pulls out a box. Just walks into the scene and drops down a box. He does a Freddie Mercury pose on top of the box. And then he just convinces everyone to get together and start singing Ode to Joy.
Yeah, this is why the DARE program became such a big thing. Because you had people walking into public parks
with
boxes and offering people handfuls of drugs.
Yeah, well,
But he gets them to sing Ode to Joy and then gives them the like suicide cult speech, and they're all down for it. And he hands out some pills, and as they take these pills, it sends a psychic blast to our best girl.
Yeah, and I thought Mai was actually starting to do the Kamehameha with the way she was waving her fingers around.
Yeah, and I think this is another, and I'm not like a kind of a Buddhist, like Taoist thing, or not Taoist, like Buddhism thing, the kind of repetitive Naruto-esque hand gestures is part of like a mantra.
Okay.
Those become a theme throughout, that there's like a very tactile aspect to her engaging with whatever the power is that she's got.
And yeah, like you said earlier, she's like floating above her desk.
But again, it's like a really
Very
harsh
good.
cut. Like it shows a bunch of kids' bodies on the ground, and then smash cuts to just a locked off shot of her floating, and all the students around just like, what the fuck? And that one student in the background slowly standing up, like, I'm gonna run. Is anyone else gonna run?
Right.
And then I guess obviously she gets hospitalized.
Right.
She's got a bad case of the floaties,
Psychics.
so we put her in the
Yeah,
hospital.
that's-
But there's no matter how well you tuck her into a bed, no tucked sheet will hold my down. She starts just psychic blasting people around her hospital room.
Yep.
We get like a conversation between Sarasawa and Mai's doctor, and he's like, I think she's forgotten how to use her brain.
Yeah, I don't think this guy's a good doctor.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah, that's the one where because he had like a clipboard. I wish they panned around his clipboard, just had a highlights magazine on it. He was working on the amazing. Yeah, I think I think her brain came unplugged. So.
And Sarasawa's like, the psychic power started when her mom died, so it's probably tied to that in some way.
And the doctor's like, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. I only deal with real medicine.
Right.
Brains
That's like-
becoming disconnected, not this weird ghost stuff.
Well, yeah, he even gets up in Sarasawa's business and he's like, do you really believe in psychic powers? He's like, yeah, you dumbass. It just happened.
Do you remember the 911 call for floating girl? Like,
Yeah.
uh,
Come on, man.
yeah.
And then to like further confirm it, they get like blasted back, like they kind of get thrown back against the wall, and then the window just opens telekinetically, and a cup floats up.
Well, let's just say the cup had some help. It had a string. Well,
Yeah, I mean, that's a really hard shot to make, because it's harder to diffuse natural light, so
Yeah,
you don't
yeah.
see the fishing line.
Yeah. But still, that was pretty funny. So I guess we had Flappy Cup in this one.
Yeah, Flappy Cup. That is true, because we were devoid of Flappy Birds or Flappy Bats.
that's-
So
And
Yep.
this cup shot is definitely like a repeat of the umbrella shot from earlier, because the cup goes out the window, falls and smashes, and then right next to it is a dead lady on the sidewalk who has jumped out of a hospital window and died on the sidewalk.
So I was kind of wondering, was it just her sensing that happening, or did she partially cause that to happen?
I thought the same thing. I don't think she caused it, because
Right.
again, she is our one pure character, and it's obvious that people dying
Affects
causes a negative reaction in her, or is like harming her, or it's not something she's enjoying. So I think that was her way of recreating or drawing the attention, because it would have been weird if she was just like, there's a dead lady on the ground outside, because she
Right.
couldn't talk because her brain's disconnected.
Yeah.
So that was literally her way of like, hey, follow the bouncing ball, idiots, and showing them like, it's still happening. Get me out of here. Get this figured out. I don't like this. Would be my guess.
That makes sense. And also, we all then get a new card, G, Beyond the Human Species.
So I feel like here we get into this is where we get into a much more traditional Frankenstein story. Like up until now, there was, other than someone saying the word Frankenstein once, there really wasn't anything Frankenstein-y. For the next 30 to 40 minutes, it's pretty solidly a Frankenstein story, I would.
Yep.
Yeah.
You are correct. You nailed it.
Yeah, so we get Sarasawa like walking through this like foggy forest. He's again being like stalked by Haruho, the hunchback, and they like kind of get in a fight, and then the fight sort of tumbles across a bridge, and then they like enter a house, and then
Haruho pulls Sarasawa into the house by his ear.
Yeah.
What did you say? This was the Kugan, the silly kind of portion in between.
Kyogen was the comedic. Yeah, and again, the comedic bits are very short, and they're spaced between the more serious bits. So we get those for the remainder of the film. And I also forgot to bring this up earlier. When we first met Haruho in his Volkswagen Bug full of dead bodies speaking Spanish, he's also holding a giant early 90s cell phone.
That's right.
And like talking to presumably Alio, because he's like, I have them. Buenos dias. So yeah, he gets dragged into the house by his ear, and we finally meet the namesake. We meet Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah, and it turns out this guy's either an anime or a video game character.
This is anime as hell. Like he's got
patch.
an eye patch, a cape, like slick back hair, a cane. Yeah, this dude is like full anime boss fight mode. He's ready to go.
And like he's not tolerating their kind of like shenanigans, and like kind of puts a stop to the fight. He's immediately like, okay, I've been waiting for you, Serizawa. Like I expected you would get here eventually. Good to see you. And then we get like the camera like pans over as like Haruo leaves the room, and then it pans back. Aleo's just gone. Like he just like teleports away. Like the camera panning seems to be like Serizawa's like vision, basically, like what he's seeing.
And of course, as Haruo leaves, Buenos Dias.
Yeah. But like really, he's just like Buenos Dias, and then wanders out. It's very surreal.
And so now Serizawa's like alone and is like, okay, I gotta find Aleo again. So he like starts just kind of wandering around the house.
Yeah, and it's like he finds a statue upstairs of like a woman in really beautiful gown. Turns out that's not a statue. That's an actual woman just standing there.
That's a lady girl. That's a woman.
And it's like it kind of is sort of an echo to when like the student came to his office and he like grabbed her breasts to make sure she was real. In this case, he touches her face, which is obviously slightly more appropriate. Like you shouldn't just be touching people, but if you're going to, that's a better option. And he's like, okay, you're real. And then they both kind of like, she's like, who are you? And he's like, who are you? Like they're both kind of confused by the appearance of the other one, I guess.
Right. And
then Aleo just pops up through a trap door and is like, hi. And he's like, okay, so that's my wife. Her name's Kurara, and then we just cut away to them like all eating dinner together.
Right, and it's amazing. Like Haruo's dressed as a butler. He even has the nice little white gloves. He's serving everyone dinner.
And so like I know it's like a thing in like Japanese like foods, like people like slurping soup is like an acceptable thing, right? It's not
for Aleo. It's not. He's tired of that shit.
So the slurping soup thing would be like in a not formal environment. Like it's a way to like eat noodles. And I've heard a bunch of different descriptions that it's like, oh, it's a sign of respect, or it's, just, it's the way, because you're supposed to eat them. You're eating the food while it's still hot and fresh. So you have to do that so you don't burn your tongue. So it's a sign that the food is hot and fresh, and it's a sign of respect. So what it comes down to is it's not rude to do in like general company, but at a coursed dinner with a humpback maitre d', you wouldn't slurp food. That would be considered like kind of low class.
So that's a lesson for you kids out there who are in Japan, slurping your noodles. Don't do it with the hunchback maitre d'.
No, if you're ever invited over to a one-eyed man's house, don't slurp your food in front of him, because he'll whip your shit with a cane.
Holy shit!
This is again this just kind of like overacted, where he just like whips her and she's just like wow, just like full on Waluigi sounding like just screech. And I just couldn't get over how like at this point Serizawa, his reaction, he's just like, yeah, okay. I mean, I am a guest in this home, so.
And he's so like not trying to like make waves that he's eating soup that has like a fly swimming around it, and he's trying to like eat around the fly.
And of course, the soup's too salty, so Leo sends it away. It's like, go take this away, it's too salty.
And he asks Serizawa, he's like, so I've been kind of outside of civilization for a while. Is the world still like super boring?
Right. No, power plant exploded. There's war in the Middle East. Anyway, diseases, we got a suicide plague. It's just some general end of the world stuff,
Which I couldn't tell if Aleo here was being truthful, because we see a clip later on that I think is another very surrealist thing of him and Haruho out in like a frozen, like they're in part of like downtown, but all the people are like frozen, and he's like walking around, and he goes to the university. So I didn't know. I think he actually knew what was happening in the world, and it kind of, we see more of that later on. I think he was just trying to play coy and like trying to gauge Serizawa if he could trust him, I guess.
Well, and that also leads to a statement that he makes later on, and I doubt the veracity of that statement, but we'll talk about more when we get there. So speaking about that, the fly, or I thought it was a bee, landed on Kurara's head one more time, and Aleo just goes, "What?" one more time with the cane.
Whips the shit out of her forehead, and again, she's just like, "Wah!" Like whips her in the face. So
but it is interesting that she kind of has a childlike demeanor. I think that's kind of the whole point of this scene.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then we get like a rare moment of Alio trying to like be humorous, where he like tells Sarasawa that they're eating human meat, which obviously disgusts Sarasawa, and he starts like spitting it out, and he's like, I'm just kidding.
The discussion is like, Haruo brings it in, right? And he sets it down. It looks like pork, or it's nondescript meat product, right? It's hard to tell what it is. It might be half cooked. Who knows? But he's like, oh man, this actually is really good meat. What is it? And Alio's like, oh yeah, it's just the skin of men who like really good meat. So
asked and answered.
Yeah, it's like, you're next, buddy. But not really. That was a joke.
So yeah, he's like, I'm just joking, and they keep eating, but he's like, I'm not really interested in this whole suicide disease thing. Like, I don't know why you came here with questions about that. Like, I wish there were more dead bodies. They're better than living bodies. I might even be dead myself. Who knows? He like kind of goes into like that, he's like, I'm not really like socially conscious. Like, that's not the purview of like scientists. We only care about science.
Yeah. We're not about the ethics in this house.
Because basically, like, humans have reached the end of their usefulness. They can't achieve anything else. It's all downhill from here. They're going to kind of spiral down. But I am making the next step in the evolutionary process, and that will end the downward spiral.
Speaking of which, do you want to follow me down to what I assume is the basement? Or like a warehouse that was on site? I don't know what kind of building they're in. A lot of pipes and ducts in there. So.
Yeah, it's something. Alio, he basically introduces, this is my Superman. Rips off the cover, and of course we have a mostly naked guy standing there, and then he's like, and his mate, and rips off the other one, and we have the lady from earlier, and she's still wearing her crotch bandage.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. You can't show that on TV.
You got to. I mean,
it also, like, specifically having like the male creature and the female creature there in just the tiny little, like, it reminded me of Flesh for Frankenstein. Like, they are wearing basically the exact same thing in that.
Yeah.
And really, there's a lot, like, the Frankensteinian stuff in this feels of a piece with that. Like, I guess Flesh for Frankenstein would have been older than this, so it may have been partially an influence on at least how he was handling the Frankenstein stuff. I don't know.
That. Pardon the joke. There's a lot of DNA that these two share. Sorry. Well, speaking of DNA that they share, apparently these creatures are going to have sexual encounters, and they will be legendary.
So his whole plan is he's made, a bride or a creature and a bride, but he's not really concerned about them so much. It's more that, he's going to breed them, and that's going to be the evolutionary, like, leap, is like the creature created from. Reminded
me really, and obviously I doubt there's any connection here, but for like the newer Blade Runner, that was like the kind of conceit of, the villain in the new Blade Runner movie, where he was like, I have these replicants, and if I could just get these things to make babies, it would solve all the world's problems. So as I loved, the newer Blade Runner movie. And so I saw that and was like, oh, cool. This is very reminiscent of that.
Maybe it inspired that.
But so they got all the parts and the plumbing works, but this is where in my notes, and I'm not proud of this, I just wrote, you can lead a beast to pussy, but you can't fuck, is what I wrote in a moment of madness. Because he's just like, and he mentions some scientific, he's like, the neurons or whatever, the neurites or whatever he calls them. Yeah. I don't know what word they translated here to get to that, but they were like, they're just not aligning properly for these things to form feelings and emotions. If only there was a thing that could help power. Me. If only there was a psychic in this big city of ours, and well, it just so happens.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarazawa, you happen to have a psychic daughter, right? We didn't plan this at all. This is amazing.
So it's you bring your daughter to the orgy kind of thing.
Well, of course, Sarazawa's not about that.
Yeah, like he's very curious about getting help from Alio, but like now he's like, no, I don't want Maya to have any part of what's going on here. Alio's like, this is the only way to save the human race. This is the cure for your suicide disease. Mm-hmm. I can't open the roof and bring lightning down. Like, I'm not Frankenstein. That might be my nickname or whatever, but like, this requires a different kind of power, and she's the only one who can help.
That's right.
And Sarasawa was like, okay. It didn't take a lot of convincing. So,
well, he does go on a slight run here because he's like, no.
Yeah, and he goes to like book it, and then comes on like I don't know if they were taking like a union break or what was.
Well, he walks in on Carrara changing. Like at first, it's like
yeah, but then isn't this also where he like opens up the door to the room and it's just full of cult members?
Yeah.
There's like a shipping container, like it's just a door, and he slides it open, and it's full of cult members that are just like crouched in like a big group, right. And they see him and they're just like wah, and like they chase him. They just like run after him. So I still don't understand what was happening. I don't know why Alio had a room full of
cultists,
death cultists.
Like to a point, I was like, oh, is Alio the guy who's running the death cult? Like, is this his like secret body creation?
They kind of address something similar to that later, and I think I get the part later on. This part, I don't know why he had a room full of, because it wasn't like a room with like couches. It was like an empty room, and they were just like squatting on the floor, all facing the other direction. They turn around and scream and chase him.
It's amazing. They chase him directly into another room that has Haruo in it, and Haruo just goes, "Meet my pipe."
Yeah. So much, just this nonstop return to like slapstick. Like we just had a pretty poignant,
right? And
now we've got to have, we've got to ease some slapstick in there to keep the people interested.
That's right. Yeah. And after Serizawa gets KO'd one more time, you'd think he would get brain damage by now, but we then cut to Mai opening her eyes.
So, she's awake, so probably sensing her father was injured or whatever. And then we cut to the scene you mentioned earlier where you got Alio and Haruo walking through like a crowded street, but everybody else is frozen in place. I'm again like not really sure if this is like if there is some kind of psychic stuff going on here, or if this is just like metaphorical, that like they're just kind of like observing the world, and even though in reality it's moving, it doesn't feel like it to them.
It felt like a musical, like one of those things from a musical where like, oh, okay, this is like you're not actually singing, you're just kind of you're going through a day and this is in your head. So I couldn't tell if this was a real thing, because he even goes back to like the college campus, because we find out Alio used to be a professor there. That's kind of the connection, that he got kicked out for the horrible morbidity of his experiments. So I have no idea if they were actually wandering around in the city, or if this was like a thought experiment that Alio was getting up to.
Well, regardless, it enables him and Haruo to walk past all the physicians, all the doctors, all the nurses, everyone in the hospital, just grab Mai, put her in a wheelchair, and rush her out.
Yeah. So again, I don't know if like it was just Haruho and Alio was like remote viewing or something. Right. That again is that kind of absurdist Wizards did it. Like it doesn't matter if it was real or not. Mai's at the house now.
Yeah. That's
and then we start what I really wish would have been a montage, because man, it would be a hell of a montage, the training that they try to do.
Amazing.
For the monsters. But Mai is able to use her power to activate the neurons or whatever. The creatures seem a little bit more sapient that they had previously.
Yeah, and it's like she does, like you said earlier, she does the like the hand motions,
and then like finger gun kind of. She is some, and the camera is doing that thing where the camera's like she's kind of spinning in a circle, like she's on a desk chair, doing her hand signals. Then at the end, she just kind of goes like pew, and the girl comes alive, and then pew, and the boy comes alive. It's like, wow, they really botched the landing on that one. So this is again, I feel like, and you all have watched a couple of Frankenstein movies, the moment where the monster like steps off of the platform, or when it first is the it's alive moment is usually like, I mean, that's like a penultimate part of those movies. Like the music swells and you've just got this like, wow, like it's a spectacle. And this one, the two creatures step off of their platforms, turn to face each other, and Alio's like, all right, now kiss. Fuck, kiss, start fucking. Like, and just immediately, like, their circus animals is like trying to like push their faces together, like, now kiss her, and then put your thing inside of her. And then we get this like, nah, man, it's not about sex, it's about love.
And they don't know the intention behind the act, right?
Yeah, so that becomes like the sort of argument between Alio and Serizawa. Like, Alio's like, we just need to physically explain to them how to have sex, and then they'll do it, and then we'll have the baby. And Sarasawa's like, no, they need to want to have sex. We need them to be emotionally attached to one another.
So then Alio's like, fine. And then we like just see the two of them watching porn in a room together. And just like the female looking at, just an anatomical textbook of like a cross section of the male penis.
Right.
Well, I said male penis, but of the penis. So, and it's a really cool, that earlier comment that you made, Alio's like, it's science. Like science is all that matters. And that's his thing, is like, the parts are there. They have muscles, they can move, they could be able to have kids. And now we've got, Sarasawa and Mai that have introduced like, no, there's a less tangible aspect of this that we've got to address. And it's just,
and by the way, what a way to tell yourself, Alio, to say you've never satisfied a woman before.
Yeah. It hasn't satisfied a woman yet.
Yes, that's right. That's true.
But I thought for me, the kind of the next like 15 minutes or so were kind of it just felt like it was kind of a dead horse thing. Mm-hmm. We were just like, all right, you watched porn together for 25 minutes. Let's go back down to the basement and see if we can fuck this time. And it still doesn't work. And so it's just this kind of Alio's trying to rush everything.
But we also get some scenes there where Carrara is kind of hanging out with the Superman. There seems like there's something happening. They haven't got romantic.
Carrara, Alio's wife, has taken an interest in the Superman, and we see that Alio's eyes linger maybe just a second or two too long on the female creation he's made. So
it looks like they're not pairing up the way they meant to, right?
Yeah. So this, like you said, it's not exactly a montage, but it's like almost a montage.
Right. This also leads into the Section H teaching.
A poorly paced montage, I would say.
Yeah.
It could have been a montage. Like, legitimately, I think this 15 or 20 minutes could have been a 5 or 6 minute music heavy montage.
Yeah. Somewhere in the middle of there, we also get Alio finally admits to Sarasawa that Carrara is not his wife. She's his first attempt at a creature.
But he hates her. And that hates her guts.
Yeah. He's like, I failed with her because I forgot to activate her womb. So she's sterile.
Yeah.
We didn't have any, and for all of the monsters, even for like the Superman, the Frankenstein in this one, the monster in this one, it's not as macabre or like overly, make-upped.
Yeah, he just looks like a guy with scars.
Yeah, it seems like a guy with scars. And for Carrara, the initial deal, the only thing we ever saw with her is she's wearing kind of those like support, not like crutches. I don't know, they're like forearm crutches or whatever you call them, that she, needs to get around.
There is one point in there where like it's pretty much a requirement for a Frankenstein movie that like the monster has to see himself in a mirror and kind of get upset at his own appearance and run away.
Right.
That happens while he's with Carrara, and he like runs out to the beach
and is like mystified by the sea.
Yeah.
Like it's drawn to it, I guess.
Yeah, but Mai is there, and we don't really hear what happens. The camera's kind of far away, but like clearly she's comforting him in some way.
She like hands him a flower, doesn't she?
I don't remember specifically.
She might. Yeah, I know she's like, I think like touches his hands and stuff, but yeah, that's definitely possible that happened.
Right. Because I was also almost like, oh no, we're going to have Maria. She's going to get tossed in the ocean.
And we've got a couple parts in here where we, in between seeing like what the monster and, or the monsters and Sarasawa are getting up to, we go back to Alio a couple times, and he has some expository fourth wall breaking at the camera, and he's still playing the very sinister kind of character, explaining like, here's why I'm doing this and here's why I know I'm right.
Yeah, he seems to think that emotion is the reason, or is like the sort of catalyst for the suicide disease. And so that if he creates these emotionless supermen, then like that will solve everything, which, kind of explains why he's so resistant to Sarasawa being like, we need to get them to fall in love.
Right.
Because that sort of completely breaks the whole purpose of their creation.
And I don't think they translated it perfectly, but during one of his moments where he's kind of extolling those, he talks about like when he's talking about emotions being evil, he kind of goes into like the ratio of emotions, like the negative outweigh the good. So he doesn't deny that there are positive human emotions, but he was like the bad ones far exceed the good. So the answer is to just do away with both. kind of.
Yeah, and also during the scene, he's literally just trying to get the monster, or I guess what we can just say the monsters, to have sex. And he even gets on like crotch level and starts yelling at their crotches.
Yeah, he just yells at his penis. He's like, "Work, damn you, work!" So yeah, he's getting more and more frustrated and more like desperate.
Yeah, but it seems like the female monster is like, okay, we can do this. There's a point where they're just watching porn, and she tries to initiate something by groping the Superman's thigh. She's like, okay. And then he does order her to basically just strip down naked in front of everybody. And she's like, all right, let's do this.
And he's just he's just not feeling it. So
yeah.
And then we get a weird monologue by Alio saying he's lived alone in isolation for 100 years. What is this? This is hyperbole, surely, right?
Well, and that's Japanese isn't quite as subtle with hyperbole. Like idiomatic speech and hyperbolic speech isn't as common, especially in like the very direct, like he's using what's called keigo, which is like super formal Japanese. And it's a little bit less, you don't use as much hyperbole or exaggeration. So
he could potentially have lived 100 years.
He's speaking very literally, which is, again, not to say that it's true, but he's not saying it in like the, like he would say like, oh, it feels like I've been here for 100 years. He's saying like, in the 100 years I have lived here. So there is some hint that like, okay, he is a pretty phenomenal scientist that has managed to extend his own life, but he's not worried about extending life. He's worried about creating new life. So
makes sense. And also, as we know, it's very easy for Frankenstein or Frankenstein adjacent scientists to just extend life almost indefinitely. Right?
Right. Yeah. And there's also somewhere in the midst of this sort of montagey bit where he shows Sarasawa his only friends, which is a collection of abnormal fetuses in jars. So
which
that, harkens back to the one we saw at the beginning of the film.
I get it. I collect Starbucks tumblers. Where he's coming from.
We should probably stop the warning here real quick, because apparently one of his fetuses has apparently committed suicide by tying its own umbilical cord around its neck and choking itself to death in the womb, as you do.
Right.
Which again, I don't know. That's one of those things where you could say like he, because that happens. Like that's just a thing that happens sometimes in childbirth.
But
this is like, but the idea that like this happened in childbirth and he was like, oh, well, look, like this child surely did this himself.
Right.
So, there's not even proof that this was
the case.
Because this supports his theory that like, oh, look at how much people want to die. Like they're killing themselves in utero. And I think we know that that's not true. It's this like cult and this, using the media to spread this kind of not a real disease, but a mimetic disease is what's actually happening. Because then we see like Alio, he does the deed with the female.
Oh yeah, during the beach episode trip.
Yeah, we get a full-on anime beach episode, which is awesome.
Right,
but it's just everybody having a good day at the beach, filmed on like an old, the camera's like like you hear the clicking of film in the camera. Yeah. But it's like the first time that everyone, even like Alio, seemed to be having like an okay time.
Yeah, they're
just like hanging out at the beach and enjoying themselves.
They're all like sitting, reading in beach chairs and everything. Yeah, it's very cute.
But then, like immediately after that, he decides to have sex with his female creation.
Well, yeah, I think it's also that she realizes that the Superman is only interested in Carrara, not interested in her at all.
Yeah,
so he's like, well, I gotta find somebody, I guess, and well, that turns to be Alio.
Yeah, so he does the deed with that, and nothing really comes to that. It's just kind of it's just again to show that like he's not the all in control guy he puts himself to be. He still is as subject to baser emotions as he criticizes other people of being, I think.
And you can't be a good Frankenstein unless you're a hypocrite.
Yeah, and it also it feels like the whole thing where he's just like, I've made these two creatures, I want to breed them to create. We don't need emotions involved. And then this is just like, no, emotions get involved every time, know? So like they were made for each other, but no, he's actually interested in Carrara and, so things don't go according to his grand plan.
So then it's like still business as usual kind of in the house, but then the main death cult leader comes for like a house visit. And this is where we kind of get what I think is like the biggest twist. Though the biggest twist since we found out that it's super normal to have a psychic daughter.
Yeah.
Because the death cult shows up doing their chant and the death cult leader and Alio just kind of have eye contact. Alio offers him a cigarette, which he smokes and seems to enjoy, and then he just says, "I'm sorry."
Yeah, goodbye, I'm sorry.
Yeah, goodbye, I'm sorry. And he turns around and walks away. And Alio, what is the quote? Alio says, like, "We both believe in the same God," which I have no idea what he's referencing there. I didn't get what he was trying to.
I mean, I guess death.
Yeah.
And he says, like, but I no longer pray. So, like, I guess I still believe death is the thing that's going to move humanity forward, but I'm doing it in a different way than you are or something.
Yeah. So this was the part that early on we talked to, or a little bit ago, that Alio had like a room full of cultists. I still don't know what that was about, but I think to me, this was like Dr. Alio instigated the death cult, like the suicide cult. Like he was the one that put this mimetic idea, this quote unquote disease out into the world to like kill yourself, because he was in the process of, he needed all of humanity to cull so that he could introduce these monsters. And now he's kind of on a timer. Because this suicide disease has taken root maybe faster than he intended. And so I'm still not exactly sure what the cult leader was apologizing for. I don't know if he was apologizing that it was working too well or not working well enough.
Well, no, I think it's a reference to earlier. I think that's just kind of what they say when they go. It's like, I'm about to commit suicide. Goodbye. I'm sorry.
But I don't know why he was saying that too.
Yeah,
I don't know what he was apologizing for. He felt like he had done something wrong, or if he had just drank the Kool-Aid to the point where he was like, well, I've spread the message as much as I can. It's time for me to, act on it. And then
I think that's what it is. I think he's like,
that makes more sense. It was just a little unclear to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I almost thought it was like maybe sort of like a religious phrase that they use that, like, because that's boiling down every suicide note. That's the basic premise is goodbye and I'm sorry.
Okay.
And that maybe that becomes like their sort of religious words that they use.
Yeah, because he's even smiling while he says it.
Well, the part that was just confusing to me is there hadn't been any pre-existing relationship between the death cult and Alio. So when I first saw it, I was like, oh, Alio has created this death cult. Like this is his weapon of mass destruction. But there's not really enough evidence one way or another, or if they were just former friends. It doesn't. I don't know what the relationship was. But then I thought it was kind of interesting because the death cult leader and his apostles go down to the beach and he does like the full Japanese seppuku. I mean, like bandage the waist, and he gets the little wakizashi and like opens his innards. So that's the only everyone else was jumping out of buildings or taking handfuls of pills. He goes the full kind of ritual deal, which again comes back to Takeshi Kawamura's thing, the clashing of Western and traditional Japanese culture. You've got people taking new age pharmaceuticals and overdosing. You've got people, jumping from buildings, but then you've got this older, more traditional, the death cult, which was a much more rooted in like mysticism and old world faith that actually goes through the process of a ritual suicide, which no one else does in the duration of the movie. So I thought that was kind of another nod at that Westernization versus Japanese tradition.
Right. And that also fills out his character because he's always talking about the glory and the beauty of death.
Yeah, that he took the time and effort to, and this is, again, not to trigger anybody, but like from the aspect of what committing harikari is supposed to do is doing it the right way, like paying respect to the spirit and paying respect to ancestors. Like he did it in a way that culturally, traditionally in Japan, would have been the appropriate way to end one's life. Out of shame is generally why that was done, for samurai defeat in a battle or whatever. So I thought that was like an incredibly poignant moment in a movie that had literally zero poignancy up until that point.
Right, yeah.
The same one that had a character yelling, hurry up, kiss, sex. And a minute later, there's this kind of really stark nod to traditional Japanese spiritualism. I thought was kind of cool. And then it goes straight back to horse shit again. I guess now things start to go off the rails that like the Alio's lost control of the monsters. He's lost any and all respect because he's bedded one of them. I don't know. I don't remember where we were at in our kind of run through after the cult meeting.
Okay, so the entire cult kills themselves off.
Right, yeah, they all kill themselves, and then we get the next title card, which is Apocalypse. Apocalypse. Alio is like trying to like have a wedding ceremony for the creatures to try to see if that will somehow force them to have sex.
But of course, Carrara kind of speaks before the vows are exchanged in a way, and of course the male monster is like, yeah, okay, I'm with her.
Steps out of the wedding to go be with his true love, Carrara, leaving his monster bride at the altar.
Yeah, and of course, who does this piss off? Not necessarily the monster bride, But of course, it pisses off Alio.
Yeah, so then we get like him attacking his own creation. He's like, this game of love is over. Their fight is very like slapstick.
Yeah, because every time like Alio hits the monster, it just kind of takes it. It's like whatever. And regardless of how like slow and gentle the monster hits him, he like goes back at least a foot, right? Yeah. So it's like clearly that you're not going to win this fight. This is not a fight you should be picking.
And then like both the Carrara and the female monster both disappear, and then we get a fight like a full on WWE fight scene between the creature and Haruho.
Yeah,
where they're like putting each other in like submission moves, and the monster gets like, and then at first it's just the monster and Haruho fighting, and then the monster like bops Haruho on the head, and he starts bleeding down his face. Then Alio shows up with an axe.
Right, he's like, I'm done with this. I'm getting the axe.
Yeah, and he like buries the axe. At first, I thought he got him in the neck, but he got him kind of like in the shoulder, like top of the shoulder. And then the monster pulls the axe out, and again, what I think happens quite a bit in these Frank Stone stories I read, the monster turns against its creator, which who'da thunk it?
Right, yeah. It's like that's a trope or something.
But he like gets him in the stomach with the axe, I think.
Well, yeah, we also have the female monster basically trying to stand up and protect Alio. But the male monster just picks her up, spins her around, and throws her into a shelf, and that's it. That's all
she's out of the fight. But the monster like wounds Alio in the stomach, and this happens a lot in movies. You know, someone gets wounded and they manage to stumble a few feet. Alio stumbles for like 3 miles. He like stumbled out of the room, down a hallway, out of the house, down a really long driveway, across a field to where the bug is parked, the car, gets in the car, drives not even as far as he stumbled, and succumbs to his injuries. But I just couldn't believe it was like watching someone, strip and stumble for like the length of a football field. Kind of
amazing. Then we get Carrara. The scene or the whole scene kind of ends with Carrara just staring at the mirror at this point, and then we get J catastrophe. It's like Apocalypse should be the biggest catastrophe, right?
So, and I think I'm just now realizing I think I completely lost track here, because obviously like shit's hitting the fan here. We go back to the house and we see someone in a bath. I lost track of the difference between Harara and the female monster. I lost track of what happened to the two of them.
So the female monster got thrown into the shelf, and that's how she died. Because
it killed her. I didn't realize that killed her.
Blood trickled out of her mouth, so she's dead. That's
okay. I missed that. I missed that. I thought that was just she's out for a second, but that killed her. So then it's Harara that's in a bath, and I drowns herself. The quickest drowning I've ever seen. She's underwater for about 3 seconds, and that's enough.
To be fair, I wouldn't want to see the whole thing.
That's true, and that would have taken away from the WWE fight scene that was happening previously.
But this is like one of the other poignant moments just for Carrara, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because again, like her death is very like the movie kind of slows down and like it's short, but like it's calm, and she kind of sinks below the water, and there's like flower petals in the.
It was a very pretty shot, and in a movie that didn't have a lot of pretty shots, like the first kind of shot that I think was meant to elicit a reaction was the body on the ground in the rain with the blood leaking out. The very first suicide that we see, and it was kind of like it was a little bit overexposed. It was kind of almost like faded out white. The one in the bed was I think they finally had someone that knew how to light a scene show up.
Right.
And they were like, all right, well, all we've got left is the bath scene. Well, we're going to make that one look pretty dope, I think.
Yeah. We're going to go for all the marbles in that.
All the marbles on that one. So, I mean, at that point, all of that happens pretty quickly. I mean, all of that happens within about 4 or 5 minute?
Yeah. After that crazy long, education scene that was. But so we've had the female creature dies, then Haruo dies.
Well, not technically. I think Haruo's still technically alive.
Is he?
Yeah, Haruo's alive. He got
caught.
Right.
Yeah.
He should have died with all the blood that came out of his head.
Forehead wounds bleed a lot. A little laceration up on the scalp. It looks like you've been flayed. So yeah, he is still around at the end. So we're left with literally just Professor Sarasawa, Haruho, the monster, and Mai. And now we kind of we cycle back around to where we started. We jump back in with the narration because he basically says we decided to stay in the house.
Exactly.
we couldn't just abandon the Superman there. I had no love for being back in the society that had shunned me. I didn't want to take, my daughter around these people. So they just kind of have a happy little home life. We see like the Frankenstein wearing like a pair of horn rimmed glasses.
Yeah, that's amazing. Like he's become more like a man,
Yeah.
So here's the funny part, and this is something that I think only your Japanese that grew up in like the 60s and 70s and 80s would get. The book that he's reading, and he actually references this later, in a later bit, they're doing like an interview with the Superman where they're holding up these little placards of like, what's your name?
Oh, yeah.
Where'd you come from? We'll get into that in a second. But one of them says, who's your favorite author? And he says Natsumi Soseki, who is like an incredibly famous Japanese author. And he wrote a really famous book called I Am a Cat that is like a kind of somewhat poetic. It's written in kind of a poetic voice. Story from the point of view of like a house cat. It's like a house cat in a doctor's house. But this house cat is like judging people around it. Like there's a man called Mr. Sneeze that she hates because he sneezes a lot. But this book, it was like Catcher in the Rye for us growing up. Like this was a book that Japanese school children were assigned. So every Japanese school kid would recognize that the monster, the Superman, is reading this children's book.
Right.
They had in school. But the book is also incredibly highly critical of Westernization and the clash of Japanese traditions. So even the book that he's reading is continuing this Takeshi Kawamura narrative of like oil and water, like these two, you can't have these two disparate things in the same spot. Right. So I think that kind of what I like to think when we get to the end here in a minute, that reading that book was like a self-actualizing or a self-realizing thing. I think that influenced how the Superman ended.
Okay, that makes sense. But also, speaking of disjointed scenes, we get one where Maya's taking the Superman through Tokyo?
Yeah, it was different places in Tokyo.
Yeah, and he has a bag on his head. Alex, you tell me. Like, I feel like having the bag on the head would be more disruptive than just having a guy with a bunch of scars.
I think in America it would be. In Japan, I don't think so. Because I think and I think that was kind of the point that like if someone's making a concerted effort to keep to themselves, you ignore them.
Okay.
You leave them be. And so, because there's a couple of times in the scene he goes to remove the bag and she very calmly is like,
put that down.
Like if people see his face, they're going to think it's something terrible and they'll see he's a monster. Right. If it's just a guy with a bag on his head, okay, let's just do with a bag on his head. That's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, they like go to a cafe, they go and see a musical performance of, and I don't remember what song they're playing at the musical performance.
Right.
Could it be Sonata number 14, Moonlight? The one that we paid the royalties for already? But yeah, we see she's kind of taking him out to like experience the world for the first time, which I thought was really touching.
And I swear, well, I love that it maybe doesn't end, but they go to a part where they're in a restaurant. They're laughing, and he's literally smoking a cigarette through the bag.
Yeah, through the hole in the bag.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's just got one eye hole, and then he's got a second smaller hole that he smokes through.
You can't tell me that is not a reference to Friday the 13th Part 2.
Well, what I think it's actually a reference to is The Elephant Man.
Okay.
Okay.
You know what?
Which was a David Lynch movie that came out in 1980. So I think... Because, like, it's the same thing, the one eye hole, and you've got this, like,
100%.
disfigured man out in public.
That didn't even occur to me. That's, absolutely. And, I mean, talking about how much Takeshi Kawamura was inspired by, like, Western absurdist and avant-garde movie, I'd say there is 100% chance that he had seen a couple of David Lynch movies.
Yeah, but by the way, you know a person's class by I guess where they recognize the bag from. I'm going to slashers, and Anthony's going to actual like acclaimed movies.
And see, that to show you that to me that was just a bag. I didn't get any references there. So we see them having this like nice little day out, which was nice because we hadn't, other than that brief kind of beach scene, no one had really done anything for the Superman, so I kind of thought it was nice to see him get to experience the world that his creator had such disdain for. And then we get to the interview at the end.
I don't know what it was about that interview like hit me there's something about it, like, you know, I mean, it's pretty, there's not much to it, like you get like title cards almost that show the questions and then you just have the creature answer them. But there's something that just felt so real about it that it like really kind of like resonated emotionally with me.
Because it had like for posterity's sake. And I think it was also the really sharp twist that the questions took. Because it starts off with like these very existential Like I put my notes here. It says like, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am nothing." And he said, "Where are you from?" And he says, He says, "The ocean." And very simple answers. She says, "Why did you come?" He says, "To become human." And then the things like, "How did it go?" And he said, I couldn't. Like I couldn't do it. Yeah. They said, "So what are you now?" And he said, "So now I'm a child of the universe." So like this incredibly, like I thought it was going to cut right there because like, man, that is like this intense. I'm nothing. I came from the ocean to become human. I couldn't do it. Now I'm just a child of the universe. And then it says, "What's your favorite food?" Right. And this is again something that contextually he smiles and says like "kare raisu" in like a very animated way. The kind of ongoing joke in Japanese culture is curry rice is every kid's favorite food. It's the peanut butter and jelly of Japan. Every little kid loves curry rice. It's the most popular school lunch. It's the most popular thing to go out and get for dinner. So it goes from this like incredibly complex existential character to like, oh, but I also enjoy this food for kids. And they ask about his favorite color. And he kind of sadly says, he gets angry. And he's like, I can't see colors. I don't know. Then they ask about the author, and he talks about Soseki, which kind of ties in that thing that what he enjoys as far as food and books is what like, little kids enjoy. So it's giving you that, he's still this childlike. But yeah, I'm in the same way, Anthony. It hit me like that was the closest part to like, man, what a, like, not teary eyed, and that was the first part that elicited an emotional reaction to me that wasn't like a sigh or an eye roll.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the last thing, and there's not a question tied to it. It just jump cuts to him and he's writing something and he holds up the kanji for watashi, which is I, which again ties back to this whole overarching theme about the individual, like the death of individualism that people in the real world had been so ready to hear about, like, oh, well, everyone's killing themselves. I think I have this disease too. They just bought into it. So now we have this character that like very solidly doesn't have a name that he calls himself. He just identifies himself as like I. So in a way, Alio's attempt to make a perfect person had worked because he's created a person that only exists as an individual, like is incapable of viewing themselves as part of a bigger group. So again, it got super duper kind of intelligent, I think, highbrow at the end. Right. It just took him 2 hours to get there. So.
And of course, he walks off into the ocean. And...
yeah, back from whence he came. So
the last title card is K, Child of the Universe. And yeah, he walks out into the ocean, and then Haruo wakes up Sarasawa and like, kind of tells him, something's going on. And he rushes out there and is like, it was too late. He had already given his body back to the ocean.
Right. Of course, Sarasawa then goes on basically following up with everyone who had already passed on. And basically, as he's getting tired and finishes writing, Mai comes into the room. They smile at each other. They extend their hands, and for the first time, the father and daughter actually share a moment together.
I don't know if it had shown that, and I'd have to go back and watch it again. I don't know if it had. I don't remember them ever having physical contact,
right,
for the duration of the movie, because it showed her in like that hospital bed, but then it was like Alio that came and rescued her. I don't know if they ever touched, which that would be even more poignant if that was the first time that there was ever physical contact between the professor and his daughter. So
I think so, yeah, because it feels like the whole movie is like, I think he's kind of like afraid that not that he's been infected, but that maybe Mai has been. And he's been like running around doing all the, getting involved in all this crazy stuff with like a mad scientist and a hunchback and all these monsters and stuff. Right. And then like finally now they're just like a father and a daughter to like spending time with each other, which is the actual solution to breaking down this cycle of pain and suicide and everything.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if the movie just ended there? Wouldn't that just feel great?
Yeah. Oh God. I literally was like, and then the credits rolled, and you just reminded me that they totally didn't. Oh, man.
We panned out of the house, we panned out of the house into the forest to the ocean one more time. So it's kind of like, oh, we're going back to where we started, right? Except we then go to the cabinet. Anthony, what's in the cabinet?
So we have another one of the fetuses in a jar, and then the fetus just starts moving,
angrily shaking. It's so angry that it's alive.
So, and this is again, I think that's a really, and I guess you've got to finish on like a trope. You can't have a horror movie that finishes. It's got to have the end ?
Right.
But I was like, does that like is this Alio made that comment earlier about having been around for 100 years. Like, has he figured out how to?
This is his clone.
He's going to transmute his soul or something. Or like, I couldn't figure out what point that thing served.
Right.
Like, I don't know what. Like, there wasn't any hint. Like, if you would have said like, "Oh, this was the first attempt at two of my creations procreating, but it didn't work." Right. And we found out, okay, it actually did work. There's just an incubation period. Or whatever.
Right, a couple of years.
Or if this is like him coming back, or if this is about the impermanence of death or something, I have no idea.
Right.
Maybe the sequel's coming. Who knows? Yeah. We'll have second to last Frankenstein.
30-year-old movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's never too late.
Yeah, I guess that.
The best thing I could think of was like, we had the creature that was created sort of against its will and then gave itself back to the ocean to die. And then we have Alio talking about like that fetus that intentionally killed itself. And now we have this fetus that sort of is willing itself to life. So that was the only thing I could think that even remotely felt like it had any sort of metaphorical tie to what was going on. But I felt like that was a bit of a leap.
Yeah, that's the movie basically. So what do we think? What's our verdict on this one?
I really liked it. Like, I mean, it was weird, but like, this is exactly the kind of movie that like, this is why I wanted to do this show, is like to find Frankenstein movies that I've never seen before, ones that go in new, unique directions that I've not seen before. Because like, there's the couple that try to follow the novel really closely. We've talked about several over the past year, and like, those are great and all, but like, when somebody takes the bones of what Mary Shelley wrote and like has a new message, and I mean, like all the stuff, Alex, you've been telling us and sharing with us, like that's it. Like, he was like, I'm going to take this Frankenstein story and I'm going to talk about what's going on that I'm seeing in my society and that I think needs to be discussed. And like, I think that's why the book has lived on so long, because it's got room to do that. And so yeah, I really, really enjoyed this variation on the theme.
Yeah, the more and more of the episodes of the podcast I've listened to, that you all have put together, to your exact point, like for all the monster movies that have come out, of the monster kind of tropes, Dracula, all that stuff, there isn't as one that is easily adaptable as Frankenstein. The other ones have so many, rules and constraints put into him, like built-in weaknesses. Whereas like at its core, Frankenstein's just like a guy that didn't ask to be born,
right,
and is born instantly with like just horrible circumstances in the world stacked against him.
Yeah, it's like nobody can relate to that, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. There's I mean, you can draw allegories to like things that are happening right now and happening before, whereas there's not really great allegories for like vampirism, unless you want to get super like, oh, it's like corporate, man. But that's not as applicable to like day-to-day life. And I again, as a huge Japanophile and like a nerd of all that stuff, seeing how they tied in all of the kind of Japanese history and Japanese society, and knowing roughly what was happening in Japan at the early 90s, and even 40 plus years after the war had ended, there was still this clash between the public in Japan and the government, and how people didn't trust people in power in Japan because of what they had done, forcing the country into World War II.
Right.
So there's still like shades of people pushing back against the government and using theater as a way to do that.
Hey, what's theater for if not to do such a thing?
Well, and even like I talked about, some of the other cultural touchstones, the thing with like him coming from the sea, Alio never talked about like, oh, I plucked a human face from the sea and that was where it started. The whole like Japanese creation myth is like, and I think they reference it in... Most people would know it from The Last Samurai, where they talk about like a sword being dipped into the ocean, clumps of mud dripping off of it and becoming the islands of Japan. So like Japan was born of the sea. So it makes sense that this guy's returning back to there. The only other thing that I didn't get to go over that I had in my notes that I'll throw in at the end, is I talked a lot about Takeshi Kawamura and how politically charged it was. And I think we went over a lot of that. His other most famous work, which you can find translated copies of this, is a play called Japan Wars. Not the most creative name. But he wrote it in 1984. Let me just give you the brief recap. Japan Wars follows a group of young people who wake up trapped aboard a submarine, recalling only that they were once radical activists. They gradually discover they're actually androids, programmed as soldiers. All of their human memories are false, carefully chosen and implanted to control their thoughts and actions in a war against mutant cows who have overrun the planet. At the play's climax, the androids rebel, only to learn that their desire for revolution also comes from programming, secretly implanted by the cows to keep them from being milked. Their shadowy creators have engineered, so this is the poignant part. Their shadowy creators have engineered even their disobedience to prepare them for war. So like this was early on anti-commercialism, this like bleak, inescapable future devoid of meaning. The myth of individuality, like the things you think we made you think that too. Like you have no self-control. You're just this pawn of the overlords. And this, again, this overlap of fiction and reality. Like the thing you think is real isn't real. And even you thinking that it's not real is also not real because we made you do that too.
That cyberpunk is fun, man.
Yeah, and just this idea of like programmed violence and like social corruption. So I love all of his stuff, and him doing that at the time and place he did it is phenomenal. And I think this movie is just another example of him like pushing those boundaries in that way. So I like it. I'd say like a solid 6 out of 10.
Yeah, fair enough.
No, this is like a 9.5 out of 10.
Right. Yeah. I enjoyed it. I like the flavor of weird. I loved everything about it. It's got like a dreamlike quality to it, the whole thing, and I dig that. Yeah.
Well, you can definitely see throughout it that this is a dude that like his background was in the stage, like, and I've never made a movie. I've directed some musicals, but those are musicals for like little kids, or we did Finding Nemo. I can't imagine being an incredible playwright and having this catalog and then being like, oh, now I'm going to make a movie with almost no help. Like he did almost everything on that movie. He filled almost every role. So like pretty bold chance. And I mean, it shows a couple of times, but you know, in cooking, we call that like rustic when it doesn't look great. And I think the rustic, it was just enough rustic to make it enjoyable.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, a movie that has an interesting story and is trying to do something where you can see some of the seams is infinitely better than like a perfectly polished movie that has nothing to say.
Yeah, honestly, it's infinitely better than such a movie, you know?
The other part I was curious about, in all the ones that you all have watched, has there been another Frankenstein-esque movie that has this kind of love quadrangle, I guess, in this one, where there is like the monster obsessed with someone they're not supposed to be, or someone being upset? Like, I thought that was a really interesting mechanic, and I don't know where that stemmed from. I didn't know if there was any pre-existing ideas of like there being a love mix-up. With a
it's not Frankenstein the Untold Story.
Yeah, Frankenstein the True Story.
The True Story, yes.
Was that a 2-parter episode?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm part of the way through that one.
Right.
So that's another one where they introduced, but that was primarily a comedy. Not that this one wasn't comedic as well. I think it's been a while since I listened to the first half of that one.
That one, it's like the bride is created by a different doctor, and they're kind of like trying to, but like Frankenstein and the creature sort of seem to have a romance at the beginning, and then there's like this bride that's introduced, and there's like a lot of tension there.
Right.
I guess in my head, I had it that it was more situations of the creator becoming obsessed in like a romantic way with its creation. And maybe that's just because it's been done in a lot of more modern stuff, but I guess there's not a historical precedent for the creator being like, oh, I know I must have you for my own, kind of Beauty and the Beast-esque.
The only other one that I was saying, like we mentioned earlier, like Flesh for Frankenstein, there's some stuff in that where like
that's a love hexagon.
Because there it's like the same thing where like the doctor's created like a male and a female that he wants to breed, but then he also has sort of like a romantic interest in the female creature, but in a non-sexual way because he's kind of asexual. So he likes
sexual, non-sexual.
He likes to open her up and touch her guts instead of having sex with her.
No, I'm not gonna kink shame anybody here, so.
You know.
I was told that was one of the rules on the podcast.
And then Frankenstein's wife wants to bone the monster.
Yeah, so that's the closest to having a quadrangle, but it's still not quite the same in that, like, I think the thing here is it's a lot about, like, whether emotion is required and finding that it is.
Going from the assumption that, like, oh, this monster is incapable of feeling love to, like, oh, no, you just can't force him to love this person. Like, he has feelings for this other individual, which I guess was kind of that tragic irony that even if the two of them would have made an attempt at copulating, she was already a broken product, more or less.
Right.
So he was like, no, you have to be with this one. So that kind of, again, his refusal to admit that emotions were important, and then ultimately him falling into that very same trap. So the movie's a lot more clever than it would seem. And after the first 20 minutes, you're like, man, this is like some Broken Lizard level stuff. But by the time you get to the end, it's far better thought out. It just, it masks a lot of the cleverness with psychic dolls making curry.
As you do.
Or chickens on desks. I have to know what, like, were they just there? Like, someone brought in chickens for that scene.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Someone did.
Yeah.
All right. So good that we all liked it.
Yeah. We really appreciate you introducing us to this one, Alex.
I've never been happier to share something weird with another person. This is not one that I'd be like on a plane, be like, hey, what movie am I watching? Well, let me tell you about it.
Right. Yeah, I could see him be like, what? Eyes glazing over.
Like, I can't ever fly again? Okay, I understand. Yeah, no, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have recommended that to the person next to me.
Yeah, anytime you want to recommend movies, we're definitely here for it. All right, Anthony, so where can they find us?
So yeah, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Frankencast. You can email us at thefrankencast@gmail.com. We're also on YouTube and at patreon.com/thefrankencast, where you can get a lot more off the beaten path kind of conversations.
Absolutely. And of course, any interaction is good interaction, and we honestly, prefer that to most anything else. So tell us anything and we'll respond to it more than likely. Alex, are you doing anything?
You can find me on onlyfans.com/cookingbaconnaked. That's exactly what it sounds like. No, I abstain from social media, not out of any moral obligation. I'm just too lazy to do it, and I don't know how to take good pictures. And I think I look like one of those thumb monsters from the Spy Kids movies, so I tend not to put my face out on the internet too much. But no, this has been great. I love what you guys are doing. I think there's not enough I say not enough niche podcasts, and that's not true. This is like the nichest of niches podcasts. Right. And I think the primary thing is anyone that's knowledgeable can make a podcast, but knowledge doesn't even get close to like the enthusiasm that you all have for it. Well, I love it. I love every second of it. It's been one of my favorite parts of like driving to work. Is being able to listen to you guys talk about things that I didn't even know were legal to put on film.
Yeah, only in certain countries, or only in certain states, right?
In certain states. No, I love it, and I hope it goes on forever. And whenever it switches over, if and when there's another one about another monster, by God, I'll find a weird Japanese one that I can come on and talk about as well.
There you go. And yep, we'll have you on. All right. So we talked about the creature walking into the ocean. You know what? You know what comes from water?
Hold on.
I don't know.
Am I supposed to be around for this?
Yeah. Anyway, we're doing Frankenweenie from 2012.
Wait, no, hold on. Did you have a joke prepared? Because I kind of want to hear it now.
Nope. I have nothing prepared.
We talked about him. Is this like a weenie in the ocean? I want to know where we're going.
Yeah.
It's like hot dog water, right?
Yeah.
It's just salty water. You know, the ocean, hot dogs?
Exactly. It all makes sense. It's all coming together.
Man, this really, when you all called this the Thinking Man's Podcast, you were not joking.
And speaking of turkeys, Anthony, when is this coming up?
So I guess happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Don't listen to this around your family?
Right. Or do, depending on what your relationship is. All right, happy Thanksgiving, folks.
Gobble, gobble.
Gobble, gobble. All right, in that case, to be continued.
Looks like you survived another episode. The Frankencast is a production of FCR Media. It's hosted by Anthony Bowman and Eric Velasquez. Follow us on Twitter at The Frankencast, or send us a letter at thefrankencast@gmail.com. Our cover art is by Amanda Keller. You can find her at Keller Illustrations on Instagram. Our theme music is by Vivek Abhishek. Thanks for listening.
Oh, God.
I apologize for derailing your finale there.
No, you're good. That was amazing.